Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Defending the Early Years Summer Virtual Institute. My name is Denisha Jones, and I am the co-director for Defending the Early Years and lead facilitator for this institute. I'd like to begin by inviting one of our co-founders, Diane Levin, to give us some brief opening remarks.
It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today on our second day of sessions talking about all the key issues that DEY is concerned about in these times. And thank you, Denisha, for chairing this for us. Defending the Early Years is almost 10 years old. It was founded by myself and Nancy Carlson Page because of our concern about the kinds of mandates and stressors that were being put on teachers who have been trained to run developmentally connected programs with children, developmentally connected programs with children. And we felt that more and more mandates were coming down, undermining that. And we wanted to have voices out there that really were speaking for the well-being and best interests of children. And along those lines, that's why we're here today. This is a different kind of challenge that we're all facing, but it's another one where we really need to think deeply about how can we help children deal with what's going on, both in terms of in their minds and their thinking, as well as the actual experiences they're having. So thank you all for being with us today. And you will hear an introduction from each of our co-hosts, from each of our co-presenters and question responders as we go along over the next 2 hours. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Diane, for welcoming in everybody. And thank you all for being here. I'm just going to go over a little bit about how we came to have the Summer Institute and our plan for today. When I first became the director of early childhood organizing, the team at the time, both Nancy and Diane, and at the time the co-directors Jerry, Lynn, and Blakely, asked me, what do you want to do? And I pretty much was clear that I wanted to create a coalition of advocacy around early childhood that would serve our needs, and I really wanted to include teachers and those doing the work, directors, avid parents, right? Everyone doing the work, and not just the folks that are, running nonprofits or that sort of thing. So last year we did our first Summer Institute, and it was amazing. We were at the Eaton Hotel in Washington, D.C., and we were a small and mighty group, and we talked about the issues we're facing, and we talked about how to build power through advocacy. And that work was really wonderful, and we wanted to continue it this summer and every summer. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we had to switch to the virtual format. And so this year we really thought about what works in a virtual format and what we should be focusing on. And always the goal at Defending the Early Years is to really support the early years, to fight for a just and equitable education for all children. But we wanted to also acknowledge what was happening today and every day. As Nancy said yesterday, there are 2 pandemics we're facing, right? COVID-19 and the ongoing pandemic of racism. And so we wanted to put together an event that would address both of those as we thought about how to best protect childhood, protect early childhood education, and protect families with young children and their teachers. So I'm delighted to bring this together for you today. I did just want to talk briefly about Defending the Early Years in case you're not familiar with the work that we do. Defending the Early Years does a lot of different things. First and foremost, we create resources. Whenever someone asks me, oh, I need something research-based or some information about what's appropriate for early childhood, I send them to the Defending the Early Years website. We have reports, position papers, fact sheets, a video series, and even webinars on a host of different topics, authored by many different people, some of our board members here today, other board members, other supporters that work with us, help us to create these resources. They're all free. Many of them are translated into Spanish, and we are interested in working with anyone who will help us translate them into other languages as well too. We also provide support in different ways. We promote the work of our allies. Yesterday, we had Diane Ravage, who's the president of the Network for Public Education, and we work closely with them as well. We also I'm with the Badass Teachers Administration, and we work with those as well, and other allies in early childhood and other parts of education. We provide testimony in support of legislation. I was once asked to provide written testimony for an Oregon bill to get rid of testing in the early childhood grades, and was happy to do that. We consult. Our board members can offer consulting in different areas. We help with advocacy, and we also try to support the work that others are doing through mini grants. And again, you can find all of this information on our website. And lastly, we try and organize early childhood teachers as best we can. And that's how I got involved with Defending the Early Years. Every year they host an organizing meeting at the NACE conference. And it was in DC where I was living at the time. And I was surprised to see a session talking about organizing in early childhood, because that's not something I typically find at that event. And so I went and I spoke up about the work of Badass Teachers in United Opt Out. And I received a warm welcome from Nancy and from Susan Oxshorn and from Jerry Lynn. And I was quickly brought into the Defending the Early Years family. So each year we continue to host that meeting at the NACE conference, because we know it's a really important way to reach early childhood educators, advocates, and activists who are looking for a place to help them do this important work. We have the Summer Institute as another organizing event. And this year we're also hoping to launch working groups. A colleague of mine from the Screen Time Action Network told me about their working groups, and we're hoping to partner with them, but because they have an early childhood one. But often I get people asking me, how can I be involved with Defending the Early Years? You know, we're not a membership organization. And so other than using our resources, they want to do more. And so we thought about launching the working group. So we'll be talking about that, and I'll talk more about it as we wrap up on Friday. And when you get the email with the survey, there will be a link where you can sign up if you're interested in participating in a working group. So again, I hope that you'll take a look at our website and see all of these different things that we put out, a lot of the different publications, the video series, and just a lot of the things that we're able to do to support people in the community. So today our topic is on childhood trauma in the time of Corona, teachers, families, and communities as protective factors. We know that COVID-19 is impacting young children and their families. Even if no one in your family has gotten sick or died from COVID-19, we know that it's still traumatic for children what happened, right? Their every day that they were used to was upended very quickly without a lot of notice. They stopped going to the place where they go 5 days a week, and they had to learn to stay at home and to be taught at home. And it was a big impact. And then if that was not enough, the longstanding pandemic of racism continued through the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and many, many others. And so we know from the research on adverse childhood experiences and childhood trauma that the difference in mitigating against the health outcomes that typically happen is if you have a protective factor. And that can be an adult, a parent, a teacher, a family, and a community. So we really want to focus today on how we can really think about teachers and families and communities as a protective factor against childhood trauma during Corona and past Corona, right? Because the coronavirus will come and go, but as we know, we're still going to be fighting other things that cause trauma in children's life, whether it's racial trauma and other types of oppression that they experience. So our plan for the day is that we have 5 amazing panelists, and I'm going to introduce each of them with a question that they're going to discuss for a while, and then we'll open it up for a brief conversation with the entire panel. And we'll do that for each panelist. And then towards the end, we'll have our Q&A with the audience. We have a few questions that were submitted before. Participants submitted questions ahead of time, but also we invite you to submit questions now. But we ask that you use the Q&A function and not the chat function, and to submit those questions so that we can have them, and we'll address those at the end as well. So without further ado, I'd like to start with our first panelist. Takima Bunch-Smith is the Executive Director at the Center on Culture, Race, and Ethnicity at Bank Street College. She's a friend, and I've had an awesome time working with her in different capacities, and I'm so delighted to have her here. And today she's going to be talking about such an important topic, which is Black children thriving.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that introduction, Denisha. I was sitting here like with my eyes closed, just listening to you, and it's so heavy. It's so heavy. And I just want to acknowledge for all of us that we are compelled to do important work for children and families. And we have to remember that we are also part of this work, right? We're feeling the heaviness, we're experiencing the trauma as well. And we have to really think about centering the humanity of everyone if we're going to make it through intact, and which we will for sure. I'm also really glad that you started with thinking about all the pandemics, the influences, and the oppression that is a part of everyone's life, and specifically for Black children, because I thought it would make sense for us to actually go back a little bit into some of our early childhood developmental sort of theory, but it's a good reminder. So if you just go to the next slide, just want to start us off by talking a little bit about Bronfenbrenner. If folks remember Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model of human development. It's very, very salient. For me, I keep going back to it throughout my whole career in early childhood, and then as I moved beyond early childhood. And I think one thing that really just stands out to me is that working with young children and families is really about the micro, right? You see children in front of you, you see families in front of you, and you respond in real time to those needs that are presented. It can be hard to think about all of the other influences that are happening for a child, right? It's not just that they experienced domestic violence or homelessness, right? Like it's all the things that led to it. And so just thinking about these concentric circles, the influences on a child, the microsystem of the immediate environment, the indirect influences and indirect environments, and how a child interacts with all of these environments, the culture and norms and values of the culture, not just, you know, the larger American or United States culture, but the culture of the city that they live in, the culture of the site that they may be educated in, the multiple cultures that they may inhabit if their family has emigrated from one place to the United States. And then those unspoken norms and values as well. All of these things are influencing young children. And then you have the chronosystem, right? The time and historic influences, these major systems that have held intact over time, like systemic racism and heterosexism and classism, and things that are happening right now, political and socio-political events, right? We've got, you know, this is an election year. This is really impacting children. COVID-19 is impacting children. Just this morning, I was having a conversation with early childhood educators about this, and just like recognizing that for those of us who are adults, the idea of active shooter drills, you know, for me, it was very traumatic the first time I experienced one as an adult a few years ago. And I remember going home, and my child, who was just at the end of early childhood, he was 8, I said, oh, this was so hard for me to have to get on the floor and imagine someone, you know, coming to shoot me. And he said, oh, we have those all the time. That's kind of fun. We just get really quiet. And I remember not knowing how to respond, this idea of deep sadness that he's never known school without active shooter drills. But also as a young child, trying to make sense of it and make it less scary. I didn't want to scare him into being scared. But these are things that we have to acknowledge and contend with, and remember that children are never just an island, and families are not an island to themselves. And challenges that they experience and disparities that they experience are not because of who they are or their cultures. It is because of the society and the context that has put these disparities and created inequality for them. And that's really, really important for us to think about when we think about Black children, primarily because we have anti-Black racism that essentially has located the cause of disparities for Black children within Black people, Black culture. Black lack of achievement is how it is often posited, and that's just not the case. We really have to look at that chronosystem and the macro system and all those other environments as creating the conditions for trauma and for children to not be able to thrive. So I thought we would just kind of very quickly start at the beginning. And if you go to the next slide, this is a truly upsetting thing to consider. But just looking at the US maternal death rate, and I got the most recent stats from 2019. And so Black women during pregnancy die 37 Black women per 100,000 women, pregnant women, and white women is 14.7. Now we know that any number is too high, right? There's absolutely no excuse in a industrialized nation or anywhere in the world that any woman should die because of pregnancy. But to have Black women dying at 2.5 times the rate of white women is simply unconscionable. And it is completely due to systemic racism in the medical field, in the healthcare and access to healthcare, all the things that we know. It's not because Black women are doing something to make themselves die. And, the thing for me is I look at these statistics and it's easy to just look at them as numbers, and they're overwhelming as numbers. But when you recognize that these are actual women who have families, who have other children, who have partners, who have mothers and siblings, and who have unborn children who then don't get to have their mother grow up with them, is absolutely devastating. And when you think about trauma, it's not just going to impact one person, right? When one Black woman dies in pregnancy, a whole community feels the ripple and feels the effect for generations to come. And so I pulled this slide from a presentation that I did in October. And this woman, Shani Gibson, is a woman in Brooklyn who actually died in pregnancy the day before I was about to present. And I had to pull her picture up and put her on this slide. But when I pulled it up for this presentation, I said, oh, wait a minute, but what about Sha'asia, who's another woman in Brooklyn who just died at Woodhull Hospital about 2 weeks ago. And so the fact that it continues, it's a trend, is just deeply upsetting. And let us remember, this is not about deficits in Black women during pregnancy, right? This is about systemic racism. And so when you go to the next slide, another place where we see systemic racism is in when children are born. I'm sorry, just to backtrack, we also know that those disparities hold for infant mortality as well. So Black infants die within their first year of life at the highest rate of any other race of children. And that has been persistent and consistent despite interventions that have been tried. Again, many of the interventions focus on trying to fix something with, right, the children or the babies or the households that are raising them. So when Black children are able to be born, right, and they end up in preschool, I know many of us as preschool experts and staff have heard this statistic before, that Black preschoolers are 3.6 times more likely to receive one or more suspensions from preschools than their white counterparts. And Black preschoolers only make up 19% of preschool enrollment. This stat was from 2016, so we'd have to look at what's happening as time has gone on. But we know that Black children are not just suspended once, but they're often suspended more than once. So again, mind blown, because we're still trying to figure out why or how would you suspend a preschooler. Of course, we shouldn't be suspending anyone. But then on top of it, to have this racial disparity is truly upsetting. And then now we're starting to get a little more data that when you dig into the intersectionality of identity, that Black children who are boys with IEPs often bear the brunt of this type of exclusionary discipline. So it's highly problematic. Again, and this is about the system, not about what Black children are doing in preschool. So if this isn't upsetting enough, and I'm sorry to depress us all, but I'll try to bring us back up a little bit with hope and action. If you go to the next slide, this information really depressed me. About a year ago, I was aware of a meeting that happened, and folks were looking at suspensions in New York State childcare programs that included family childcare. And early Head Start, which is 6 weeks to about 3 years old. And they found that 12% of the children in these programs were expelled from their programs, right? Infants and toddlers and preschoolers. And there were racial disparities where Black children and children of color were overrepresented in these. Some of the examples or reasons for these suspensions or expulsions were that they were crying too much. Which blew my mind, right? So we've got a systems problem in early childhood because we have a systems problem in the United States. So if you go to the next slide, please, Denisha, thank you. Denisha, can you pause it for a sec? Yeah, thanks. So this is about a 7 minute film, which is too long for me to share right now. And so I was hoping I would just tell you about it, and then I will put the link in the chat so folks can go and watch it. A film called A Girl Like Me. So I can't see you, but if I did see you, I would say, who knows Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark? psychologists who worked in Harlem in the 1950s. And I would hope that most of you, all 180 of you, would raise your hands and say, oh yes, we know they did the doll study. So very famous for the doll study, which was looking at preferences for Black children, right? It was an experimental environment. They put Black dolls and white dolls in front of Black children and asked them, which do you prefer? They asked them a number of questions. What's the prettier one? Which do you prefer? Which one do you like? Which one is the bad one? And overwhelmingly, Black children chose the white doll for all of the positive characteristics and the Black doll for all of the negative characteristics. So this is in the 1950s. So if I'm doing my math correctly, 70 years ago, which is really amazing to say, because in my mind, the 50s doesn't seem so far away. But that was depressing, that was upsetting, and it became the basis of the desegregation movement. Yes, thank you for the time check. So Carrie Davis did a recreation of this study back in 2015, and surprise, surprise, she found the exact same results in 2015. So pause it, you can go to the next slide. So this is something that's happening, right? We have all of these disparities, but yet I participated in a early childhood Black Lives Matter at School symposium, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And I asked folks, have you had specific in-depth training on how to support Black children from birth to 8 years old in educational spaces? And I said more than an hour or two PD, right? In depth, you take your time, you took a course, it was ongoing. And really 84% said no. And I've asked this question over and over again. And usually the numbers are the same or higher, that pretty much no one has had any race specific or culture specific to Black children to help them thrive. But yet we do get a lot of PD on how to bring up test scores, right? How to make them more like whatever the norm is without taking into account all of these oppressive systems that Black children live within. So I wanted to just go on to the next slide and tell you that, ready? Thank you. So one of the things that I think is really important, and not just me, but Black educators and researchers, is that we really need to make sure that we're implementing culturally, developmentally, and I would say racially responsive early childhood education for Black children. We have many models of this and how it works, and we have research on how important it is, but it's just not as mainstream as I think it should be. So we know that Black children thrive in progressive educational settings, whether at home or in school, but they actually have the least access to hands-on, interactive, and play-based educational experiences of any race. And so it's important for us to really think about that. These are 4 examples of resources that people can take a look at that will move us from thinking about Black children as from a deficit perspective into a strength base, and saying, here's how you can take into account the racial and cultural identities of Black children and build upon them and build environments that support them, and also investigate your own biases and participation in anti-Black racism. So if you go to the next slide, there's 2 more resources that I just wanted to share. Movement here. And so just this idea of, because we live in a deeply white supremacist and racist society, there really is no limit to the amount of positive support we can give towards Black children to boost their identities. And so we have a few examples. Pride over at the University of Pittsburgh is positive racial identity development in early childhood. And so that's something you all can take a look at. Little Some People also and other Afrocentric preschool programs are doing this work. And the key is they're not just doing it with children, they're interrogating it from the adult perspective. They are partnering deeply and equitably with Black parents and communities, and they're also involved in activism and policy change. So just wanted to share a couple of those thoughts in terms of how can we get Black children to thrive, is that we actually have to focus on the strengths that they bring and the challenges that exist outside of them, and work to eradicate those challenges systemically. I'll stop there.
I did not want to cut you off, but
I'm sorry.
so much good information, and I know, and we've talked about this, so you know that it's so near and dear to
We
my
can
heart.
keep going.
Yes, we could keep going, and we should have follow-up conversations, because I think what we're seeing in the chat is that people really care about this as well too. We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to bring in the rest of the panelists to see if anybody would like to give a brief follow-up to what Takima just talked about. Go ahead, Susan. Thanks.
I'm just so glad that you talked about Bronfenbrenner and how children are affected by things going on in the world that adults tend to think don't have any effect on them. And I just think that's really, really important for us to remember. That was terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, I did the same thing, Susan, when I saw the slides. I said, Bronfenbrenner, I just thought of him. But you gave me a whole new perspective. My students next 2 weeks are getting a whole new perspective on Bronfenbrenner, because I didn't even think about how we question the macro and the chrono and how they're causing the deficits, and that's so important. Yes, Diane, please jump in.
My first course in child development was taught at Cornell University by Yuri Bronfenbrenner.
Wow.
500 other students in the university auditorium.
Awesome.
And he was the most amazing, profound lecturer. It took me many years, and then the other courses I took all were connected to his theories. And then I was in Detroit. Well, I'll talk about this later. But the Bronfenbrenner experience absolutely established the foundation for everything that I've become. There have been many other important influences. He was the most amazing lecturer.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, that's a really
yeah,
we're going to have to talk more. I want to pick your brain on that for sure. Sure, Erica. I'll let you
I just have a super quick follow-up, which is that I worked with Walter Gilliam at Yale, who did the study on preschool expulsions, and he's the person who found the disproportionate rate of expulsions for Black boys. And I just wanted to say that one of his follow-up pieces of research is that when you have really effective classroom mental health consultation, you can really have positive effects with teachers to not only examine their implicit biases, but actually get the tools to help children who might be struggling. And that can really reduce the effect of this terrible kind of epidemic of preschool expulsion. So I just wanted to say there is kind of a positive, to do follow up to that. It is really grim to think about the racism and prejudice that's so prevalent, but there are actual concrete tools that we can use to give adults, what they need to prevent that.
Thank you, Erica. If you could drop the title of that book in the chat, someone's asked, and Takima, if we can get those links, I'll try and do, but if I don't, if we can get the links of your 2 resources in there as well too.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
I'll do that.
Sure. Conversation going. I want to turn next to Ajuma Jordan, who's an early childhood consultant. Now, if you've gone to NACI before and you've tried to get into one of her sessions, look, I was like, if she sees me, she will let me in. And they were like, no, the room is full. I'm like, she'll let me stand behind her, please. And I couldn't get her to see me back there. And I was very upset that I missed her, but that's what NACI does. They put her in a tiny room and she packs it because everyone wants to come to her sessions and hear her talk. So I'm really excited to have Ajuma today. And we want you to keep this conversation going. And so we're asking you to talk about how can early childhood teachers serve as protective factors against racial trauma and toxic stress from COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Denisha. I'm still hearing about how people couldn't get into that session, but we have the internet, so more and more people, no one's closing the door on this session. So thank you for inviting me. I'm still thinking about what Takima shared and thinking about how important it is for us not just to be non-racist, but to actually be anti-racist and confronting our anti-Blackness. And as we think about the protective factors, that we have to understand that it's not those aren't the identities. So poverty, any abuse that's happening, going through the trauma of COVID, that is not the children's identity. And also to acknowledge that we as educators, we as caregivers, we as early childhood educators are and need those protective factors for ourselves, that we need to have the mental health support, that we need to have a community that we can rely on as we start to support children and their families. And so I think it's very important that that we know that we are not just offering protective factors as a way to cope with the unjust and oppressive systems, that we're just not giving it to cope through the racist systems that are set up in early education, but that we actually use those as actual protectives, that we actually work with ourselves, with other teachers, and with families and with children about how to be safe going forward, and how to not just cope with what's happening and being in these systems, that we actually do the work that moves us past and make sure that we're overcoming these oppressive systems, that we're actually working for social change. And then when I think about just as an individual and as an educator, I think that it's important that things are changing, that COVID has completely rocked our world, that the education system that we thought that we had isn't here anymore, and that we're actually moving towards something new, that we have to build something that's actually equitable and just, and give ourselves space to mourn what used to be, but know what that used to be didn't actually serve all children. When you look at the suspension rates, when you look at the infant mortality, when you look at maternal mortality, that we need a new system in early care and education, and that this is the time for us to do that work. And so I want to offer that it's important that we be flexible, because the change is happening constantly and daily. And so we can't be rigid. So in the classroom, we have routines and rituals and schedules, but we have to be flexible in our daily practice with children, because the things change, the things that we're asked to do will change. The materials that we use might change. So making sure that we aren't stressed out, that we have a flow that works for us, that it works for children and works for families. So if we're worried about everyone showing up on time or everyone getting to the center every day, we might want to rethink that. We might want to think about having more flexible schedules. We might want to think about that as children get used to what it means to social distance in early childhood education programs, that the idea that you're going to keep children 6 feet apart isn't actually what's going to work for us. That children need to be in community, and children need to be close to us, physically close to each other. And so we have to be flexible about what the mandates are saying and how to keep ourselves and children safe, and not try to police or try to make it a performance about how we're keeping each other safe. That if we're using a system that's actually pod, that you and the group of children and the other adult, that you only interact with each other, that's more reasonable and manageable than trying to keep everyone 6 feet away throughout the day, and try and not promote isolation, that this is a time for community, this is a time for coming together. So we have to be flexible and not be so rigid and trying to hold on to what used to be. I also think that it's important that we be honest about our own feelings and about the children's feelings, and not try to brush it away or be stoic. That, again, that a big thing happened with COVID. A big thing is happening in communities with the racial uprisings. And we can't pretend like it's not happening, and that children don't have some ideas and have some questions about what's happening, that children know that they haven't been in programs in a long time, that they haven't seen friends, and some of those friends might not have come back. And so we don't want to pretend like none of it ever happened, that we want to talk to them about what they did at home, and talk about what they know about why they were at home and why we're back, and why, a teacher might be wearing a mask, talk about and be honest with our feelings I talked with a group of educators that wear masks or face coverings or face shields in their classrooms. And they had a lot of anxiety about children's reaction to that. So it was, for me, if we're going to be child-centered, then a lot of times we should ask the children and share with them how we're feeling about being worried. And like, so what is the worry? So one teacher was like, oh, I was worried that like they might not know it's me because like half my face is covered when I just have the mask on and not the face shield. And so asking children about what do you think? Like I was letting them know, like I was worried that you couldn't see me. And when I had a conversation, like one teacher reported back that the child was like, well, I knew it was you because I could smell you. And not in a bad way. It's not like they stank, but she wore a particular perfume, and the child always like knows her scent and knows her fragrance. And so he was like, even when your face was covered, like I knew it was you. And like other children were like, oh, I know it's you because of your hair. I know because of your body. Like I know because of your eyes. So remembering that children are resilient, that we should talk to children, ask them what they know, and be honest and authentic. And if we're feeling some anxiety, if we're feeling a little scared, like we don't have to confess all our feelings to children, but let them know that, you know, I have been a little worried about my family and about what might happen with COVID. Like I'm worried about the racial uprisings and if people are being safe, like what's happening with the police and people, and talking with children. And children have ideas, especially in preschool. Like they have some ideas about what we can do about it. Children are very receptive to our emotions and can support themselves and support us in processing those emotions. So, but it's important not to just be stoic and pretend like nothing else happened. That or nothing is happening right now, that we have to address it with children in an age and developmentally appropriate way. I think also about being playful and play-centered, that this isn't the time to put play aside. That there's a lot of talk about children falling behind, that they aren't learning. But as early child educators, like this is the time to say that, yes, that we should be playing, that we should be outside. And not only the children are in our programs, but helping families and other adults that take care of children at home to make sure that there's a playful attitude throughout the day, that children aren't sitting in front of computers trying to do lessons, that we're actually helping them engage and play, and that we can be play partners with them. And figuring out where we can have that joy and that fun and that togetherness that they would have if they were with other children or if they were in group care. So remembering that we should be offering play to children, and not just for them, but for ourselves and for families. And having a playful attitude, and that's part of our authentic care that we want to offer children. And also thinking about how we can continue to be advocates. Because the system hasn't totally fallen apart. That the problems that we had about making sure that teachers are receiving a worthy wage, that teachers are receiving the benefits that they need in this times of COVID, that those conversations should be happening within our programs and with other educators. Am I out of time? Because I see Denisha's face.
Almost. If you have another final thought.
So being flexible, being play-centered, being honest, and being advocates are the things that I want to offer as protective factors for educators to have going forward.
Thank you.
Ta-da!
I agree. I know I have to turn on my camera. A little nudge, but I can't interrupt you because you're saying so much important stuff. If you could see me over here head nodding, like, yes, right? It's so much. It's so great. So again, I'll step back and open it up to the panel and see if anyone would like to offer a response to what we just heard from Ajuba. I know when we were talking about the session, you know, it's also like protecting teachers as protective factors, but who's protecting the teachers, right? And I think you came across that at the end in that advocacy, right? We need to protect teachers right now too, because they're really vulnerable in this situation, right?
Absolutely.
They're being attacked for not rushing into COVID schools, as if that's okay. And I don't think it's, some of it's intentional, but I also think some people just aren't thinking through it clearly. Like, why we expect teachers to risk their lives and the lives of their families? That's not what anyone signed up for.
Right. We don't have to be martyrs.
Yeah.
Like, we do not have to be martyrs. And our society needs to confront that. Like, those sexist ideas that women have to sacrifice themselves, because in early childhood, we're 98% femme identified and women in this field. And so we don't have to be martyrs. We don't have to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. So if you want sacrifices, there needs to be resources. Like, give us resources, give us the things that we need if you want us to show up.
Yeah, and we would have got those resources in March when parents were like, oh my God, your teachers are amazing, I can't do this, right? But now we've shifted from teachers are the best to, just go back to school and risk it all. Go ahead.
Can I bring up something that I was just listening to Ujama, I'm sorry, can you pronounce your name for me again, please? Ijuma. Okay, I was like, I know it's wrong and I have to get it right. You said it kind of quickly, but it's just sticking with me. This idea of there were problems with schools before.
Yes.
Right. And so I feel like I worry that there is sometimes this mythology that we sort of live in right now and say, oh my goodness, COVID has upended and messed up everything. But it feels very disingenuous to the fact that I feel like early childhood in many ways was almost at a breaking point before COVID, right? With funding, with, nobody could find certified teachers, with teacher preparation, but there were so many challenges. And then also this pandemic of racism was ongoing. Black children have known about police murder and violence before. They have, experienced it in their families and spoken about it. So I wonder about, we have to get real, we have to talk in a very real way about how inequitable the society has always been, and that COVID is just now, we hope, the straw that broke the camel's back. But I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried worried too. We have that opportunity, but are we really going to have the courage to step up and say, no, we have to be creative and flexible, like you're saying. We can't try to do what we did in February. It wasn't working, and it's not going to work now. So I appreciate all your comment, everything that you said. I was also nodding my head vigorously.
Yeah, because it's not a shock. What's happening is not a shock to Black and brown people and people of color. That this is how it's always been, and we're needing the white people in our lives to step up and move forward with us, because this is the time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I know we can keep going, but let's get going with our next question and our next panelist, and then the discussion will keep evolving, and don't think you can't come back, right, to something that you heard earlier. So up next, you've already met her, but she is Diane Levin, and she is a co-founder and senior advisor to Defending the Early Years. She's also a professor of applied developmental psychology, Wheelock College at Boston University. Once I first joined Defending the Early Years, Diane Levin emailed me and said, let's write something together. Let's do something together. And that was the first time an esteemed faculty member reached out to me. I was, not even in a tenure track job, and said, let's write something together. And we co-wrote an article on preschool suspensions that we got published in Ed Week. And I literally loved working with Diane ever since then. And I'm really happy that she's a part of Defending the Early Years. So Diane, our question for you today is, where's my question at? How can parents, teachers, and communities work together to support children's development and learning in the COVID-19 era, right? Thinking about online schooling or remote schooling or part-time schooling, right? But also knowing that it takes a village, right? Parents can't do this alone. Teachers can't do it alone. We need everyone. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a very complicated issue, obviously, but the more we understand young children and their developmental needs, the better we're going to be at figuring out what to do. So for instance, therefore having I'm going to start with something very direct and straightforward, which is about 25 years ago or more, I was involved in founding an organization that prepared materials to help teachers and parents deal with issues in the world that were difficult for the young children, deal with issues. And especially at that point, it was media and technology, where teachers said they had some children who didn't know how to play because they were on screens all the time, even then, where a child in one classroom, the teacher put out Play-Doh on a table near the beginning of the year. A child poked it and pushed her finger in and said, "What does it do?" Like she was pushing buttons on a screen. And that idea that children, and especially in these times during the COVID situation, are more and more again likely to get addicted to screens because parents have all the demands that are put on them. Children are, cooped up without all the things all their rituals and routines, which are so important when they're young. Without the schools they usually went to, where their needs were often met in very meaningful ways, hopefully. So it ends, their playmates hard to be with. So it's really a time when there's a great deal of stress on parents and teachers. And one of the things that happens is when children's routines are all disrupted, is this sense of feeling insecure. The sense of safety is really important for children, as we know from people like Piaget and Erickson, and children's and many others, but children who are involved in a world where all their rituals and routines that help them understand how things went safely and securely to the extent they did, when they start being disrupted, this can start leading kids to withdraw. I mean, there's both the process issues and then the content issues. Kids don't understand very well what's going on necessarily, usually, and certainly not the way we do. So, and secondly, there's the process issues, how it affects their ability to interact with, be comfortable with, and do the kinds of things that they always did to help them feel safe and secure, especially in their play. So sleep problems, all kinds of things I've been hearing about from teachers and parents. So helping children feel safe and secure in these times when parents are often scared, when teachers may be worried, thinking, what can we do to not put all of that on them and help children feel safe and secure is really important. And one is obvious, but to help maintain their rituals and routines. And I do want to add that a lot of this came from having had my first course at Cornell with Yuri Bronfenbrenner. It was the foundation, just to build on to what came earlier. But helping children feel safe and secure. I was in Detroit during the riots of 1967, when I was at Cornell. Students went there to study at a place called Merrill Palmer Institute to learn about urban issues just when Head Start was getting, and poverty issues, just as Head Start was being founded. And Detroit had among the largest group of low-income children and families, and neediest children and families in the country. And Merrill Palmer was developing programs to help early childhood professionals, teachers and social workers, learn about how to work with children and families with Head Start and with other programs that were attempting to counteract the impact of poverty. And then, so we were doing this. I was part of a kind of developmentally based innovative childcare summer program. And suddenly the riots of 67 came, and we couldn't meet for quite a while. There was smoke in the air. There were machine guns that we could hear at night. There were tanks going by. And when we finally could see some of the children who came back maybe 2 weeks after the riots ended, you could see the trauma they were experiencing, what it meant to not feel safe, and how their behavior had changed, the things they said, the way they acted, the way they played. And that made me decide to do a master's degree in working with emotionally disturbed preschoolers, work in Roxbury at a psychiatric clinic. I came to Boston to go to WeWalk, with a program they had funded by National Institute of Mental Health, to study therapeutic early childhood practices. And now, while few children are experiencing the extremes that I'm describing, we saw children all the time who just had disruptions in their family, in their home, in their routines, and how hard it was for them to understand it. So when we think about what to do in these times, I think one thing is to think about how in the midst of all of this, can we help children feel safe and secure? What can we do to help maintain their rituals and routines, even as things are changing? If they get sick or someone near them gets sick, what can we maintain anyway? Not just put them in front of screens more and more. How can we help them use their play? And Play-Doh, putting the Play-Doh recipe on is great, but an organization I helped found beyond defending the early years many years ago was TRUCE, Teachers Resisting Unhealthy Children's Entertainment. And it was because teachers who I worked with as part of my teacher training and education in the Boston area and in other parts of the country said they had children who couldn't play. And so then defending the early years teacher said, was saying that, not only could children not play, but now all they were supposed to do was sit them down and have them do worksheets all day and teach 4-year-olds the alphabet and how to write it. And these were children who had never gone through the processes they needed to become problem finders and problem solvers. It's why many years ago, I started writing about what I call problem solving deficit disorder. Children who didn't see things happening in the world as interesting things to try to figure out and feel the positive attitudes that they could try to figure them out. And so, with the worksheets and the kinds of things that children are asked to do now, teach them that you just try to figure out the rote things you need to do. Learning isn't interesting. Watching kids when I taught kindergarten, figure out how to tell the stories they wanted to, first with pictures and then gradually with help with a few words and gradually adding words. That's how I used to teach reading, and my children some children were doing very well by the time they got to first grade. So the idea that we in these times need to just keep children sheltered, we need to think about what kinds of activities, how can we help them get engaged, get excited about something, and it's going to be different for every child. But giving the organization TRUCE, which I mentioned, and online truceteachers.org, is full of guides to help parents think about what kinds of things around the house can you use to promote play. Blakely Bundy, who now is the co-director of Defending the Early Years, has been very active in TRUCE for many years. That's how we originally met. At an NAEYC conference when TRUCE was presenting, but she's now been very involved in TRUCE and preparing the guides. But what we do is they're all online, they're not copyrighted, truceteachers.org. You can download them and you can make copies, or you can send the web addresses to parents or to your colleagues and have them use the guides. But I think it's really important, as I said, to think about resources besides screens that are going to really help children get connected and feel safe and secure and excited about things that are at home. We need to think about these issues in teacher education and how to prepare teachers to do this with kids as well. So on that note, I will turn it back to Denisha.
Thank you, Diane. That was great. I'm so glad you talked about TRUCE. One of the questions we were going to ask later was about resources for supporting parents through play, and you've answered that. TRUCE.
Right.
We put the link in the email. It's truceteachers.org, and they're play plans, and they talk about how to play, how parents can facilitate play at home with those thinking toys. That's a quote from Keisha Reed, who you'll meet tomorrow, right? But that to Diane's point, right, that the toy doesn't do it all for the children, right? And it gives them something, and how parents can really facilitate play that way. And so it's a really great resource. I love the TRUCE materials, and I'm glad you got to share a bit about
One thing TRUCE does in everything is really think about developmentally appropriate. And I don't mean that as it's used often in formal education, but what we really know about children's development and thinking, social, emotional, and cognitive, And how do we use play, which we know is the most important way we can help children deal with the issues of development and in their lives to develop in meaningful, positive, productive ways. And there we have it with, so truths will definitely help readers who are interested in these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, it looks like we're good. We're in a good place. I know I'm like looking at the clock. I'm like, do we have a minute? Are we good? I think we're good. Awesome. So, and we're going to keep the conversation going with our Q&A, but up next, we have Susan Lynn, who is lecturer in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Harvard. I think that's actually wrong.
I could transfer to Harvey, though.
I'm sorry, it's actually on the slide that
I know.
my apologies. Harvard Medical School, research associate, Boston Children's Hospital, and she's a member of the DEY National Advisory Board. And I recently got to work with Susan in a very intimate way. She's an award-winning ventriloquist, and she's done a series of videos for Defending the Early Years. Please check them out on our website with Audrey Duck. And I got to do one of the videos with Audrey Duck. And it was a lot of work, but it was like the most fun I think I've had this summer. It was like really fun. Audrey's amazing. She and I are friends now, and it was really good. And, the first two videos that you did with Audrey with Defending the Early Years were looking at COVID-19, right? How to talk to kids about what's happening. And I know we did one about being tired that it's still happening, right? Because I'm sure kids are like, when is this silly virus going away? But for the third video, we actually talked about racism and what happened to George Floyd and how to talk to kids about that. And I think as we heard in Takima's talk and Ajuma's talk and in some of the Q&A, if you're on the Zoom, right, is that we have to tell the truth. We have to give this information to children. Otherwise, they're going to get it in a way that's not safe, right? They're going to come to their own conclusions. Silence teaches the wrong message a lot of times, right? And we don't want children to learn through our silence. It was great to have that conversation with Audrey and with Susan.
And you're a rock star, Denisha. So
thank you.
Audrey loves you.
So thank you. So our question for you today is, how can we talk responsibly to young children about complex problems like racism or the ramifications of COVID-19 crisis, including unknowns like whether or how they will be returning to school in the fall, right? Because this is super important.
Thanks. First of all, I'm just so honored to be here today and to be following these three terrific speakers. So DEY, thanks for inviting me. And I have to say that my favorite way to talk with children about difficult issues is through play, and in particular, play with puppets. I spent a lot of my life doing play therapy with children coping with issues ranging from hospitalization. I worked with kids with HIV, abuse, all sorts of things. And so playing with kids is a wonderful way to get a sense of where they are in the world. And I think it's important for us to remember that creative play, hands-on creative play, is really a window into children's hearts and minds. And it's a gift to them, and it's also a gift to us. And I'm going to give you a really quick example of that from this summer. I spent a lot of this summer chatting with Audrey Duck and with kids around the country online, or rather, through, I guess it was Skype that we were using. And there was a little girl who's 5, and her mother had mentioned that she was struggling with the little girl about doing schoolwork. And, we can talk about whether or not 5-year-olds should be doing schoolwork at home. But anyway, this little girl was supposed to do it. And her play was all about teaching. Audrey had learning time every single time that I talked to this little girl. Audrey had learning time. And the little girl would say things like, Audrey, learning is hard. And one day she invented a very strict teacher. I mean, Audrey, a really, really strict teacher. And I said to her, well, how do you think Audrey feels about, having such a strict teacher and all this learning time? The great thing about play is that sometimes it's easier for kids to talk about somebody else and not themselves. So the little girl said, well, she feels like me. So then I said, well, how do you feel? And she looked at Audrey and she said, Audrey, can I talk to Susan privately? So Audrey Audrey said, well, can I listen? And the little girl said, yes. And so she leaned forward into the screen and she said, she feels like me. And that's just a wonderful, I think, example about how kids, can project their feelings onto fantasy creatures, and that it's a safe way for them to, express themselves, and also a way for you to accept the things that they're concerned about. But when we think about talking to kids about difficult issues, I think that one of the things that we tend to focus on are children's cognitive development. We know their brains are growing and developing. I mean, they hear things concretely. They may not have a good grasp on what's real, what's fantasy. I mean, lots of sort of cognitive differences from adults. But what we don't hear people talking about a lot is the fact that young children, very young children, experience the same intense, powerful emotions that adults do, and to the same capacity. Children are capable, young children, of great happiness, great joy, great sorrow, great rage, great fear, all of those. And it's very important for us to remember that children have feelings about what's happening to them in their world. And it's also important to remember, and that's why I was just so glad that Takima talked about Bronfenbrenner and the fact that kids are affected by what goes on in the world beyond their homes, beyond their communities. And so I think that one thing that's important is to find out what kids know about what's going on. And if you feel like you want to have, or you need to have, a conversation with the child about what happened to George Floyd, or about the virus, or about something else that's going on in the world, first of all, I think it's important to remember that it's likely that kids know something about it. I mean, they hear the grown-ups talking, they hear other kids talking about things. But it's important to start out and find out what kids know, so you know where to start with them, and to ask. So, I get a sense that you're thinking about what happened to George Floyd, and you may have heard his name, and I'm wondering, what you think about it. What do you know about what happened? That's a really, I think, useful place to begin. And that it's important to acknowledge children's feelings about what's going on, to accept them, and also, as Ujima pointed out, to have feelings and express your feelings. I feel sad about this. I'm angry that this happened, so that kids can develop a repertoire of language around feelings, and be able to identify theirs. And I think that one lesson that's important for us to help children with is that it's okay to have feelings. Any feeling you have is okay. You can't necessarily act on those feelings. And one of the things that children, don't have is the same kind of self-control that adults are at least supposed to have developed. So, it's okay to be angry. You can't hit someone because you're angry. You can't hurt someone because you're angry. but it's okay to be angry, and it's okay to tell people that you're angry and why you're angry. And finally, I think that it's certainly important to use simple language and to remember that kids may not understand abstraction. Young children don't abstract very well. I mean, to stay as sort of as concrete and simple as possible. But what's most important in these kind of difficult conversations is to make sure that kids know that they can always come to you. What you want is to develop that kind of a relationship with children that they know that they can come and talk to you. And I'm done. So hi, Denisha.
No, that was perfect. And I think that's exactly what we did with Audrey, to kind of show that, she heard, she didn't understand, and she felt safe enough to come to you and say, what are you talking about, right? And that's so key, right? Because if we don't create that space where children know that they can hear something and then follow up safely with you, then they're not going to ask you those important questions, and they're not going to get the answers that we want them to hear. So yeah, that's really, really powerful. Thank you. I'll open up to the panel to see if anyone would like to do a follow-up to what we just heard from Susan and from everyone, from Takima, from Ajuma, from Diane. Sure, Erica.
I just wanted to follow up with Susan's comment about how we often focus on cognitive needs of children and their cognitive development, and that we overlook the emotions. And I've always thought that some of the biggest mistakes I made as an early childhood teacher in the classroom was when I would assume in one way or another that kids' cognition was really similar to mine, but somehow their emotions were sort of simpler or softer or, different. And of course, it's really the reverse, I think. And so I love that Susan pointed that out, that, our emotions are all the same, but actually young kids do have different cognitive processes, as we all know. Anyone who's taken the child development class knows that, young children are more concrete, and, I don't need to go into all the details, but so anyway, I appreciated that making that visible, that we need to join kids emotionally.
We do, and we need to not be so afraid of kids' emotions. What are we so afraid of? Like, we think that they don't have a right to their feelings. They don't have a right to be scared and angry and upset. And it's just, and if you talk to any woman and someone tells you, don't be so angry, like, those are fighting words. Like, what? You've made this 10 times worse, but we think it's okay to tell a child, right, that they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling. And it does them a disservice, because it doesn't help them to process that. You can't process what you're feeling until you feel it, until you acknowledge it, that it's there.
Right. And one of the things that kids need, the way that adults, the same way that we need, they need to be validated. I mean, and that's so important, really, to validate their feelings.
Well, you often hear about active
The
listening
way that
and saying,
adults,
so
the
it
same
sounds
way
like
that
you're
we need,
really angry
they
because
need to
this
be
happened,
validated.
or you're worried
And
about blah,
that's so
blah,
important,
because, this
really
could
to
happen to
validate
so-and-so,
their
or
feelings.
doing
We
that,
often hear about
helping
active
children.
listening.
I call it
and saying,
slides
so it
versus
sounds like you're
movies.
really
Kids thinking
angry.
it's more like slides. They can't always make all the logical causal connections. And often when we, if we do very simple connecting two slides to make a little teeny movie without being complicated about it, it can help them learn how to process some of the stuff that's going on for them, but help them deal at the immediate moment with what's worrying them.
That's a good point, Diane. And one thing that I didn't say that I also think is important is that it's also important to help children have hope. And I don't mean phony hope, but to, like, one thing, if kids are worried about what's going on in the world, is to say to them, there are people working real hard to make this better. Or if they're, in despair about the, COVID, then, to say, there are scientists who are working really hard, and this is going to end. It's going to end. It may take a long time. And so it's important to make sure that we communicate hope to them, as well as being able to hold their fears and despair.
And then that just made me think, I'm sorry to interrupt, can jump in again, but helping children think about things they can do. I know with my old son, his own son, when he was grown, he's grown now, but when he was little, one day he said, there are people who got hurt, and blah, blah. And I said, yes. And a lot of people are worried about it and trying to figure out. I asked him where he heard about it, but I also said, do you have any ideas about what we could do to try to help them? Let's think about if there's anything we could do. And he said, well, I have $3 in my money jar. Could we give them some of my money to help? And, money is something, I wasn't necessarily happy that money was the first thing on his mind, but we had talked about charity, and he got something like 25 cents a week, and we always say 5 cents for charity. We started talking about it right from the beginning, but he said, I want to do that. And I said, okay, let's sit down and, get the money you want to give. And I'll show you how I write a check for that amount of money. And here's an envelope. Let's write a letter. And I had him dictate a letter to me, what he wanted to say. And we put it in an envelope and we mailed it. And he's now a grown up and he's a DJ. And he gives X amount of money that he raises from his DJing to charities, just like he did from his allowance. And it just pleases me no end. But establishing those foundations with children to feel like they can have an effect before they're totally logical, and thinking about feeling like there is power in the world. It's not just all bad, especially in times like this.
And that's really important when we do a lot of racial justice work with children. It's really important that we don't just be like, yeah, all this racism here and it sucks, and just leave them like that. Like, one, if they're Black children of color, they know racism exists, but we have to give them tools to actually, what can they do about it, right? Because the worst thing you can do is just leave you knowledgeable of oppression with nothing to do about changing it, right? But we also we can't tell children that, like, I remember once a parent told me, her daughter said, I'm so glad Dr. King ended racism, Mama. That's what they taught us in school. And then her mom was like, oh, snap. This is why we're not making any progress, because we're teaching kids that racism ended with the March on Washington. And it didn't end, right? It's a continual struggle for justice, but there are things they can do to be a part of that struggle.
And we keep in mind how young children think, that they think about one slide at a time, making little movies and then helping them connect the movies is one of the ways to do just what you're saying.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are on our last panelist. I'm very excited. And then we're going to head to the Q&A. So if you have not put your question in the Q&A, please do that. So our final panelist today is Erica Christakis, who is an early childhood educator, author, and a member of the DEY National Advisory Board. I think you were recently, Susan might have just came, but you're both pretty new to the board. And so I haven't had a chance to get to know you as well yet. But I did add your book, The Importance of Being Little, What Young Children Really Need from Grown-Ups, to my to-read list, which is very long. I had hoped to get to it before today, but that was not possible, but it is there to read. And so we're delighted to have you on today. And we wanted you to talk about what families can do to really mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on children, right? Continuing this theme of protective factors and what we can do, but specifically for parents who are really, they're in a bind here, right? This is so hard for them. And a lot of them will tell you, like, they don't want to be their child's teacher, right? In that sense. And it's funny when I've heard so many people say their children told them, Mom, you're a terrible teacher, right? And I think that it's even noteworthy when they're like a college professor like I am, right? But it's different, right? So parents are struggling. They're trying to deal with this themselves. They're experiencing trauma, and they also have to support their children. So any advice that you can offer them would be greatly appreciated.
Well, first, I just want to thank you for having me on this panel, and I don't want to repeat what so many of the previous panelists have said, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief because I'll be echoing, I think, a lot of what's already been said. But I think when we look at the role of parents, we can't lose sight of what the science of child development tells us, which is that children learn within the context of relationships. And so, that is critically important at all times, but especially during times of national trauma like we're experiencing now. Children are really embedded in family relationships. And I think in a way, and they learn through relationships. We know that families can be and usually are protective factors. Obviously, there are children for whom that is not the case. But in even the most dire circumstances historically, children have really derived a tremendous amount of support from family members, even in really challenging times. And I think that continues to be the case. Now, I've noticed that in all of the discussion around the school shutdown and the crisis in childcare, which, as others have pointed out, is a chronic problem, but it's also, an acute problem right now. In a way, we are sort of overlooking, I think, the power of parents and family members to be their child's first teachers and most important teachers. And I understand, as a parent myself, we don't necessarily want that role all the time, but it is the case that young children learn from their family members, from their caregivers. And so I think we need, as educators, to really empower parents to feel more secure in their role, and to realize that even if they're incredibly stressed by job demands, by job loss, by illness, by all of these things, they still can find these moments of connection with their children, which are really, really powerful emotionally, and they build neurons in the brain. And so I think, that's sort of the first thing I want to talk about, that, it's incumbent on us as early childhood educators to really redouble our efforts to get into the mindset of families and to really support them and encourage them, and that even in these difficult times, when there's so much trauma, that these parents can be affirmed, and we can do things to help them. There are concrete things that we can do, concrete steps we can take to teach parents about, and I'm using parents, I mean family care, primary caregivers, to teach them to be more attuned with their children. We can help them to understand the power of observation and the power of slowing down. And again, even when we only have these brief moments in very busy and troubling times, the power of just being calm and listening and having open-ended play. These things don't really come naturally to a lot of family members, and it's sometimes hard for us, I think, as educators to sort of remember what that's like when you didn't know the value of watching a child, play with a cardboard box for a long time. It's, I think we need to step up and sort of give parents permission, not only to be less than perfect, I think that's really critical right now, but also to help them see the value of just doing nothing, watching your child, listening, the power of conversation. And I would say that in my experience, a tool that I would offer to parents it's an acronym called PACE. It's actually a concept, an approach that's used with children with trauma. And PACE stands for, it's P-A-C-E, it stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And I think that's, to me, it's a really kind of simple but really powerful way of thinking about how we can encourage family members to interact with their children. The playfulness we all know and we've heard already, so I won't belabor that point, but it's not only fostering play, but also being playful with children. And, even in difficult times, like showing that we have a sense of humor and that we can be playful and flexible, as others have pointed out. I think that's something that's really important in difficult times. And the acceptance piece is really key. I think children need to know, and this echoes some of Susan's comments and others, that we are not afraid of their feelings. We accept their thoughts. We want to hear them. We accept who they are, where they are. And that doesn't mean that we don't want to set limits with children and that we don't get frustrated with them when they have tantrums, but this sort of deep philosophical and emotional acceptance of who they are and where they are. And it's very powerful when young children truly get the sense and they hear from us, everything that you are thinking. There's not a thought you've ever had that would scare me. There's not a thought you'll ever have that will scare me. I'm with you. I accept what you're feeling. That's very powerful. And related to that is curiosity, that we can communicate. And again, it's really hard for families who are struggling economically, who are trying to get work done. It's really hard to find that time to express curiosity. But these small doses, I think, of commitment and engagement can really go a long way. And I think, again, when we communicate to children that we're truly interested in their ideas, we're curious about how they think and what they think about. That's very, very important. And then the E in PACE is empathy. And again, it's sort of related to all of the above, but it's this idea of really joining children. And that gets me to another point I'd like to make, which is I think in times like this, when we're dealing with systemic racism, we're dealing with the catastrophe of COVID medically and financially, it's really, really tempting, I think, with young kids to want to reassure them. And I've heard and read this so much, and I have to catch myself when I'm involved with young kids. We want to tell them, let's say a person who's a healthcare worker, mommy has to wear a mask at work so she won't get sick. You don't need to worry about that. Or, we have to isolate ourselves from grandpa because, we want him to live a nice long life and we're going to keep him safe. And we do all of this cognitive reassurance. And, I hate to be a buzzkill here, but actually, we can't really reassure children in a cognitive way. I mean, yes, it's important, but there are things we don't know. Life is uncertain. And so when we buy into this temptation to reassure children, we have to remember that persuasion and reassurance are cognitive acts. And when we think about how the human brain works, it's not a very effective strategy to jump in and try to reassure children and give them information, cognitive, facts and data and all of that before we've joined them emotionally. And so I would really encourage parents to kind of step back, when you're tempted to kind of rush in and paper things over and say, everything's going to be okay. And let me tell you why. And actually this virus is really bad, but it's not quite as bad as you think. And, I'm not saying there isn't a role for that, but I do think if we look at sort of the science of human development, of cognition, if we look at the science of trauma and anxiety, it's actually this emotional joining that really is the critical first step. And, there are a lot of cognitive behavioral sorts of tools that we could do to support children and to maintain their routines and to give them distractions and to give them information. But unless we've joined them emotionally first, none of that really works. And if you doubt me, think about as an adult the times you might have tried to persuade someone of something that they disagree with. It's incredible the mind games we can play. We just don't believe people when they're reaching us cognitively before we've been comforted emotionally. And I want to quote a friend of mine who's a colleague who does a lot of work with trauma and attachment. And he always says, his name is Robert Spotswood in Vermont, he always says, affect is where the action is. And what he means is that, it's that emotional connection that really is where it's all about. And once you get through to that, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but, and so let me give you an example of what that could actually look like for parents. And I think early childhood educators could also use this technique. Let's take an example, like someone who's really afraid that their grandparent or their parent is going to die. And, you might not see this explicitly. It might be through their play, it might through their behavior, or even something as simple as a child who thinks there's a monster under the bed. The temptation would be, let's look under the bed. Do we see any monsters? But actually, if you say, it sounds like you're really scared. That feeling I get when I'm so worried that my family members are going to die, that's an awful feeling, isn't it? When I have that feeling, I really like holding someone's hand. Would it be okay if I held your hand right now? It can be as simple as that, just instead of sort of negating or brushing over the feeling, to actually, acknowledge, like, that's an awful feeling. But, it's a human feeling, and we all are afraid of death, and we're all afraid of monsters, and we're all afraid of these things. And so I just, my parting comment is just, first of all, I concur with everything that the panelists said, but I would just kind of push a little bit on this idea that reassurance is not always what we think it is. To be emotionally available and reassuring, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have answers. Often, you can just keep asking questions and keep expressing empathy and playfulness and acceptance, curiosity. And the content of the worry doesn't necessarily have to be answered always. And I think sometimes we think that our job is to educate children and to tell them things. But I think in a way, especially in times like these, our job is to share the burden, is to say, I'm with you. I love you. I care about you. And I'm going to hold your hand. We're in this together. So I know that might seem a little trite, but I think we can tell parents that they have more to offer than they think they do. And this is really, I think this is true for even parents, especially for parents and family members who are really struggling, who are living in homeless shelters, who are out of jobs. You know, you don't have to tell your child, it's okay, you know, mommy's gonna get another job soon. That's not really, that's a temporary solve. That's reassuring in a very limited way. But if you know about cognitive behavioral therapy, if you know about anxiety, the bar just keeps getting higher. You know, the more information, the more reassurance. But that joining and saying, we're in this together, that, to me, that's worth gold. And one, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. No,
one final point is just,
we're gonna let everyone come back in, but go ahead.
yeah. And just one final quick thing. The power of conversation. I don't know if family members really are aware of the research behind how valuable that serve and return style of conversation is. And so that ties into this PACE approach that, you know, I think as educators, we can really tell them, you know, you don't have to be following all these lesson plans and doing all this stuff. Just chat with your kid. That's really scientifically valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. And it wasn't trite at all. You know, I don't know if you got to hear yesterday, Michelle Gunderson, our first grade teacher, talked about, you know, doing small group Zoom, and some parents think it's their job to make sure their kid gets the right answer, right? So one parent sat next to her little child, her little first grader, and kept telling her what to say. And Michelle had to be like, okay, mom, I'm going to need you to step away, and really had to explain why wrong answers and a progression of wrong answers is so important for educators, because you see the thinking unfolding and you see where they're coming from, and that's what you want. It's not, it doesn't help any child, right? But think about how hard it was for the parent saying, I can't watch my child sit here and get the wrong answers, right? So that conversation was really needed. So yeah, parents need to realize that there's something valuable in saying to a child, not that just you understand what they're feeling, but I always tell people my favorite thing to say to someone is, you're right, that sucks. Why don't we just say that to people? We always want to fix it, right? Oh, it's not as bad as you think. Oh, it could be worse. No, what you're going through right now sucks. And I'm gonna sit with you and just, and that's okay, right? I'm gonna validate that, and then we're gonna be like, okay, now what should we do about it, right? But you gotta say that, you have to have that empathy, right? We have to have it. It's so important. So thank you so much. Let's get the panel in here to talk about what we just heard. Yes, Takima, please.
This last part of the conversation is really, I'm thinking about a bit of a reframing, because obviously it's definitely about empathy versus a cognitive approach. But when I hear it, I also hear it through a cultural lens. So I know that white middle class values and norms expects the right to comfort and expects closure, that something can be fixed and solved. And so when we think, you know, back to some of the things that I said, like, how do we begin to look at the strengths of Black families? Black families, we have always raised our children knowing that we could assure our children of nothing, not even life, right? Because we know that we are murdered sitting in our homes. A 7-year-old girl, Yana Stanley Jones, was murdered watching TV on her couch. Tamir Rice was 12. So we know we've never been able to assure our children of anything that I was taught was developmentally appropriate about how I interact with children. However, we survive, and we create homes and cultures and practices that actually allow our children to have such resilience and an ability to thrive within our own communities often. And so we can learn those lessons, right? Instead of saying, what are the things that, what are the ways that Black families and communities of color don't measure up to white middle class norms? We can say, hey, how do you raise your children? What are some parenting practices? And that's it. That's it. When I talked to my child for the first time about police violence, I was crying with him, and I said, this is horrible. And yes, children are sometimes murdered by police. Black children are. And it was like one of the worst moments of my parenting life. And I had to share that with him, and we talked about what people are doing, what we're doing, right? But I said, I will do my best. I will do everything, right? But I cannot actually protect you from this, because this is a system. And I told my child when he was 9. The other piece, Erica, that I was thinking about when you were talking is about, families and, thinking about taking time and, having the mindfulness almost approach, and the idea that, right, there are many families that have not been able to do that, right, in this moment in particular during COVID. And so again, we have this notion of what can we learn from Black families and families of color. the notion, everybody has 50,000 aunties, right? We don't know what the exact relationship is, but I have like 29 aunts, I have 49,000 cousins, and we live in multi-generational communities and homes. And so if we remove this, again, white patriarchal norm of what a family is and who the primary educator at home should be, then we're freed up, because we know you've got a 12-year-old sister and a 15-year-old godbrother and someone you can FaceTime with, right? And so this is the reality of how we can save families that have been thriving under this white supremacist, racist society actually have tools. And so maybe now's the time. We should have always honored and uplifted them and these practices, but now's the time where we don't actually have to reinvent the wheel. All we have to do is put the spotlight on and say, that's a strength. And we've been thinking about it as a deficit or actually making it invisible, but we can actually learn, and this can grow the field. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your perspective as well.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to really, we don't think about what the strengths, what Black families do to support children all the time, right? We always think they're not doing enough, right? I remember when I first got to grad school and I was in a course and they were talking about parental involvement, right? You know, and the measures that they described, I'm like, well, my teacher probably thought my mom was super uninvolved, right? Because it wasn't the white middle class norms. She didn't have a car in the suburbs of New Jersey, so she never went to school except for graduation. Like that was it, or to register us, right? That was it, right? But they didn't know what happened in my house, and they didn't know that my mom made school a priority. And if the teacher did call, that she would handle that at home, right? And that she would support us, and that she would buy encyclopedias and make sure that we had yes, I'm that old, that we had encyclopedias in our house, right? And she did all these things, and the teachers would have never known, because all they knew was that she didn't come to parent-teacher conferences, she never drove us to school and never picked us up, right? So to them, she was just another uninvolved Black mother, right? But at our house, education was paramount, and she got 5 children through high school and some of us through college, right? And so it's really important that we think about what are they doing at home? You know, what are they doing to support their children in building that resilience that we know Black children have innately?
You know, I often would give talks with parents and teachers, and I would point out that children in the early years spend about 10% of their lives. It depends on how long their childcare hours are, but about 10% of their hours in a year in care. And people would freak out and argue with me. And I would say, well, let's do the math. You know, here are the number of hours in a year, and here are the number of school hours. You know, it wasn't some secret that I was revealing. I mean, it's, you know, and it just shows the bias that we have, I think, culturally. And I would say also for, you know, not only for Black children, but really for anyone who steps out of the sort of mold that, you know, school knows best. So a lot of immigrant families of all backgrounds also, you know, where family is really where it's all at. And when you get back to that notion of affect and, you know, emotion being where the action is, I mean, that's family, you know, even more than school. But it's sort of, you know, it takes a shift, I think, and for people who are in a profession like we are, which doesn't get a lot of status and support, it's sort of hard sometimes to relinquish that control, I think. But, you know.
Wondering if we could talk a little more, you know, given the time, about how all these really important issues connect to dealing with the current situation, where kids are stuck in the home with families to the best they can, where there are all the coronavirus scare, you know, fears and anxieties, and how does all of this that you're talking about, Erica, and all of us, you know, what does it have to do with today, right now, and the special challenges that we're facing, and help, you know, are there specific ways to apply it to now?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we've been looking at that, and I'd be happy to hear everyone. But I think to Diane's point, one of the Q&As that was submitted earlier that I think could help frame that talk is thinking about how can teachers work with parents to really assess each child experience during COVID-19, such as family stress, illness, or death, right? To kind of get this idea of what is it, how has this impacted the child, and then how can we best support the child? And so what are some ways maybe that we can talk about doing that?
I'm not sure this addresses your question, Denisha, but it may. But listening to Kima talk, I was thinking about, and maybe I was thinking about the whole thing about helicopter parents and wanting to ensure that or believing they can ensure that their children experience no trauma or no even bad experience. Children shouldn't have bad experiences, and yet you know, the way that you learn resilience is to have a challenging experience or a bad experience. I mean, we don't want kids to experience trauma, but whatever it is, and then to be supported and acknowledged by the adults around you, and to learn that you can get through things. And Takima, that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about Black families raising resilient children and acknowledging what they're facing and helping them. You know, I can't make this go away. I'd like to, I can't, but you know, you're going to have the strength to be able to cope with what's going to be thrown at you. So I think, Diane, that that one thing that we can try to do is help parents. You know, this is terrible, and it's terrible that it's going on, and it's awful that it's happening to children. Part of what they're going to learn if they're supported is that they can get through things. You know, I wouldn't wish what's happening on anybody, but it's happening, and that is one thing, is that, you know, we can get through this.
I think I'm always thinking about things from multiple perspectives. And so trying to hold multiple truths together. And so back to your point, I'm sorry, I keep wanting to call you Ujima, and I have to be respectful. Ujama.
Ijuma.
Ijuma. Okay, it's the Ijuma. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to get it right. I have to. Ijuma. So remember, we talked about things not being great for many kids and families, right? And then we're home. And so COVID obviously has been horrible in a lot of ways. But we've heard also from adults, and I think from children, that there's some parts of not being in school that has actually been positive for people. And we haven't created a lot of space to talk about that. But when we think about the stats that I shared in terms of suspensions, right? Before you get to suspension, you've got a whole lot of exclusionary discipline. You've got, you know, a teacher calling your name a million times, giving you timeouts or whatever, right? We know this is happening, even though we know it's not developmentally appropriate. And so we have many children that are home that are not having these negative experiences in preschool. And that's very hard for us to talk about in the field, right? But I think we have to acknowledge it. So when children come back and families come back, we can make some assumptions about, oh, how traumatic this all was, or we can ask some questions, right? We can be curious about, well, was there anything that worked for you? What went well, right? Because we also want to think about how do you take a strength-based perspective, but we've really got to acknowledge that children in some cases were protected from racism and from exclusion by being at home. And they may have loved that. They may have felt more cared for and all around them. I know for myself, I loved not having to send my kid out every day to Manhattan on the train. Like, I hated it and I loved it, right? It was horrible. He didn't have so many things, but I didn't worry for like 103 days of us being in the home. So we've got to really get complicated about things and look at ourselves as a field and as individuals and how we're engaging, testing our assumptions and thinking about where we're coming from. And, you know, it's not going to be the same for everyone based on, again, that chrono system and the, you know, the larger systems that are influencing children. So I think we will be more authentic and to be able to create more equitable partnerships with families if we ask ourselves those hard questions and really invite them to tell us, what has your experience been like, right? So I just want to throw that out there for us as we move forward.
Yeah, that's an important point. It's funny, on Friday's panel, we're talking about play, and you know, one of the panelists, I sent out the questions, then he was like, I get the sense that you're setting it up that, you know, everything was horrible because school got closed. And what I'm hearing is some kids are thriving, right? They're thriving without school being open. And I want to bring that up. And I'm like, by all means, bring it up. Like, I don't think everyone is hurting, right? Because and a lot of people cause trauma. But, you know, defending the early years, we have a survey out right now where we're surveying parents and teachers of young children. And, you know, we're asking them about some of the benefits, right? And of course, some are saying there's been no benefits of all this. And then some are saying my kid gets to sleep in late. They're spending more time with their siblings. They're spending more time with their family. When this first started, our family did like a Zoom night, and my dad had us each go around and say, you know, how we're actually experiencing it. And my 12-year-old nephew says, you know, I miss school. I'm getting to get to know my mom and my dad and my brother better. And that's really valuable. And it just like warmed their hearts, right? But you know, that this 12-year-old is feeling that. And that's not something he gets to do when he spends, you know, a long time in school every day. He doesn't get to see them during the school day, like what they actually do and what their lives are like, right? And so that was really important.
That's a great example of helping kids feel safe and secure, even more safe and secure in these times, that those kinds of experiences, you know, really meaningful. That those children felt safer and more secure because they were more connected to their family now.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to keep the conversation going, but let's bring in Catherine, who is one of Defending the Early Years marketing gurus. She's made all of the graphics and really helped with all the promotion, and she's been monitoring the Q&A, and she's got a couple questions for the panel.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to blend some really good questions. So I don't know how many I'm allowed to ask, but the first question, I'm going to blend 3 questions together. And Takima and Ijuma, I'm going to have this be for the 2 of you to answer, please. So the 3 questions really have to do with how we abolish school suspensions in our elementary schools, while also defining what thriving really means, and how do we support and sustain this concept of thriving in schools and in future schools. And then to add into this, how much does the question of economic inequality play into these issues? And I'll leave that there and if maybe Takima, you could start.
No, I'd love to pass it to Ijuma. I want to hear your voice. I know you have a lot to say, please.
Okay.
That was a lot in 3. So maybe just work backwards and thinking about, like we think about class and economic status. And sometimes the conversation around equity is about if we just solve the economic status or we just help poor people, then we won't have the other issues such as racism, like racism will disappear. But we have to always understand that there's always an intersect of how race intersects with socioeconomic, around class. And so solving those actually won't solve racism. And so we have to think about that currently in our system, like we're in this white dominant, that people do hold the economic power. And so until we address that, none of the other stuff is going to figure itself out or work or get to an equitable place. So we have to make sure that we're focusing on what the actual problem is, and not just say, if we just get rid of poverty, like racism will go away. That's actually not how it works. And in education, so if we give more funding and more resources, but we have to do it in an equitable way. Like if we just give it everyone equally, that's not gonna solve, because predominantly white schools that tend to be in the higher economic space, that tend to already be funded, if they're just getting the same amount that schools that have been neglected and been denied resources, that's not going to work. So we have to give it and have resources in an equitable way. And right now in the system that we're in, that those are systems and those are school programs where Black children, brown children, children of color are in those communities. So that's where the majority of the resources need to go when we have those conversations. And then, Catherine, can you
Yep, there's the other part of this is defining, how is thriving defined, and then how do you support and sustain that?
Hmm. And so I think what Takima has been saying, like ask the families, ask the children, like what will thriving look like for you? And so what we know is that, like, if I didn't have to deal with racism, if my teacher didn't always call on me, if I didn't always get in trouble, that children will say, if I could come to school and my teachers are happy to see me, that they are happy to see my family come in here, that they don't police like what I wear, like they don't police my hair, that they don't, talk about how I wear my pants or if I wear a hoodie. So thinking about asking families, asking children, like thinking about those families, like Denisha's telling the story about her mom not being seen as an active parent because she didn't show up in the school. Like, families want to know that no matter how I am able to participate, that's going to be valued. That me having encyclopedias or having access to the internet and valuing education at home is going to be valued as the same as the mom coming in with the cupcakes and coming to every meeting and every parent night. And so asking families what they need to thrive, asking children what they need to feel, and what they want is the place to start. And that is not just like a one thing fits all of them. So if we're moving towards equity, if we're moving towards a just educational system, that we have to go back and ask the families, that we have to ask the children what they need and value what they're already bringing, that we're not here to fix. That education, and I think also that our educational programs at school is seen as the safe space, and families and at home is seen as a problem place, that we have to give that up, and not use this use because we don't feel valued. That we have to know that families and home, it can be a protective factor and is a protective factor for many, many children, and school is not. Did that?
Yes, that's great.
That was so loud. Yeah,
Takima,
no,
maybe-
Ijima, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go.
I was just thinking, I love what you said, and totally, we have to make a shift in who we are as adults that operate within the system of early care and education, and that's at every level. And just to kind of bring it back out again, because we have to really flip back and forth between the micro and the macro. What I thought about, like, if you want to know what it would look like for a child to thrive, go take a look at the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. That's from the UN. Are people familiar with that?
Yeah.
So there's even a children's book about it. And I've read it to an audience when I did a presentation a couple of years ago, right? So it's like, I have a right to a home. I have a right to food, and, I have shelter. I have a right to be called by my name. I'm just told to Ijima, I'm so deeply embarrassed that I know other people that pronounce it differently, but I got it, like, this is a right to be seen in your divine humanity in every space you go to. And Black children do not have that right, that experience. We have that right. And so I think, thinking about that, right, we have a model for how to treat children. The US has not ratified that, and it's one of only 3 countries, I believe, that hasn't ratified that. And I was told that it's because we will not commit to ending poverty for children. We need to think about race and how that intersects as well. I think when it comes to the suspension question, okay, so first of all, we need to just stop doing it, right?
Yes.
We can't, it should be illegal to suspend kids, right?
Absolutely.
But that's not gonna happen because we don't have a will, right? In our society, we are a society that has inherited this notion of punishment as an appropriate solution to community and relational challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, right, we, again, remember, anti-Black society, slavery, enslavement was about punishing people that didn't stay in their places, and then that transitioned over to slave patrols, which transitioned over to the police force. So we have been socialized into a notion of you do something wrong, and now you have a consequence. right? And so we have to disrupt that entire mindset in our society and our culture at large. And then we have to talk about it in teacher education programs and in service, right? Because what does classroom management look like in most teacher ed, right? You get your chart, you do this, you give them a red light, green light, and then you have the extreme of some of these no excuses charters that are like literally abusing children for being children and for being Black, right? So go look at some of those Instagram stories. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach, right? We can't just say it's illegal to suspend kids, but we've got to couple it up with action and a will for us to shift our mindsets and our cultural values around what it takes to get changed behavior and what it means to repair, right? So restorative practices in schools seem to start K'ing up, and usually a little bit older when kids are like in adolescence, and you know, you come and you sit down and have a restorative circle. What does that look like in preschool? We actually are the ones who invented that. Right? Tell them how that made you feel. Okay, so what would you like to, I mean, we know this.
Right? What would you like them to do? How can they help you? Right?
The peace table that Vivian Paley talked about in kindergarten. You got problems, come to these puppets and sit at this peace table and let's resolve this, right?
Right.
But you see what happened with that, Denisha, because of our cultural values around punishment, that became the exclusion table. Go over there to the quiet corner and take some time and think about what you did bad.
No.
And then you can come back. Like, that's not restoration. That's not support. That's not providing, you know, all of the things that a child would need to be able to regulate around whatever the issue was. And so this is a lot of work, but it's a commitment that we have to take if we actually are going to see change, because otherwise we are replicating, or we're at the beginning of the preschool to prison pipeline. It's not school, it's preschool. So are we okay with that? I don't think any of us are. And so this is our work.
It's the cradle, right? Your slide showed it. How can an infant, I don't even,
Cradle.
let's move on. Catherine,
I'm crying too much.
That's not,
so don't have colic.
on that slide.
Don't be a Black baby with colic, right?
Right.
It's, yeah,
And
it's
I think
mind-boggling,
that,
but it's so painful. And think about what that does to the relationship of the parent who now is, I'm taking my 7-month-old baby who has, you know, colic or whatever, and they can't be in this space. It literally damages their ability to connect with any educational institution moving forward. But then they don't show up, you know, for whatever reason in 2nd grade. And we've got this whole narrative because we haven't considered the full context that children and families are existing in, and what our responsibility is within those.
Yeah. Let's get one more question.
What you're saying so much involves taking the child's point of view and learning how to do that, and how the child is thinking about things versus how we think about them. And that's so hard for so many people.
It is, it is.
And it's not just like the individual child, that if we're doing restorative justice, if we're doing conflict resolution, that's always done in community. Like, we have to move just away from just self-regulations, encouraging that, but co-regulation. That we're co-regulating with children, that children are co-regulating with each other, and that we're solving our problems together as community. So it's not, so we don't use these tools, those conflict resolution tools, to exclude or to isolate. That if we have a problem, then it's all of our problems, and it's all of our responsibility to figure those out together. And when we ask children what can be the solutions, that usually, like, they don't want not to be in relationship with each other. They want to figure out like how they can continue to play and be with their friends. And so I think like that's important, that although like that prison or birth to prison pipeline, that early education has been the place where it can start to change, that restorative justice can take place, and we can have the practice to do that. And I think we can give that out to society and say that restorative justice does work. Like, we don't have to isolate, we don't have to punish.
And it's the importance of the early years and why we focus, right? Why are we talking about defending the early years? Because we know that if we do this now, right, it's going to save us down the line. If we keep doing it, not just people think, well, the gains don't last, because you go from supportive early childhood to not supportive public education. And that's a problem, right? We need to keep it going, right? So that it's their whole K through 12 experiences is supportive and protective factors and uplifting and affirming, right? And not saying, oh, you're not smart enough, oh, you're not doing this, right, and get into that deficit culture. I know I'm looking at the clock, we're running out of time. Catherine, do we want to try one more question?
I want to try actually two, but one more so that we can answer it later, but for everyone to think about it.
Okay.
But the one I want to ask right now goes to Susan Lynn, and it's children and teachers will be coming back to school with various levels of trauma, both from the pandemic and other stressors happening in their home, local, global communities, etc. I'm curious if you have any concrete ideas about making space to process individual and collective traumas for children and teachers.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll read it again.
I understood the question. I was just sorry it was me who has to answer it. No, Ujima, you said something in the very early on that I didn't get to comment on, and I think that it's relevant. When you were talking about social distancing and how, like, just the thought of kids having to stay 6 feet apart, and it reminds me of what Josh Golan said yesterday, which was, I mean, where, we kept bars open and restaurants open, and that's why we're in this situation. I think it's important, to know where we should put our anger about what's going on. So anyway, I thought about that. I think it depends on the age of the children. And one question is, when my daughter was in preschool, they did home visits. And I wonder if that's one way to do it. You can't do home visits, but to talk to children and parents before they arrive so that you have, a sense of it, of what's going on, and also to talk to them. And I wonder if having, and it's a burden to place on teachers, but if being able to check in individually with children and families, would in some ways maybe the most helpful. And also if you are doing, some kind of what can no longer be called circle time, or talking, together, if you can, again, validate, you can't solve the problems that the children may be raising, necessarily, but at least to validate their feelings about it. Anybody else have want to take a stab at that? It's a very good question. It's just, it's going to be hard.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned home visits, because when teachers ask me, how do I start my school off virtually? How do I build community with first graders when I have to start virtually? I'm like, you find some way for socially distant home visits before you start. They need to see you in the flesh, even if it's your mask on and it's 6 feet apart. I mean, and schools should be thinking about that. Can we set up small group meetups for those virtual classrooms, especially for the youngest children? Because I can't imagine starting that way. So I think it can be done. It's just going to take some thought and the want, right? Takima said that we have to want these things, right? And I think people do, and we have to want to provide them and think through it a little bit.
And to use morning meetings, if you have those in your classroom, to to talk about what's going on in an honest and supportive way.
So the last question that I want to ask, and it doesn't need to be answered at this moment, but for to think about, so as a way for us to follow up maybe later, is how can we organize? New Zealand early childhood educators are organizing for better pay, better working conditions, and better recognition. They recognize it also as a women's issue. Our country has not ratified the Declaration on the Rights of the Child. Parents, I tell, are surprised. They want to sign on to something. They are surprised how poorly we are paid as ECE professionals.
That's a great last question.
I have to say one word. That's
Sure.
why we founded. That is a major part of why we founded Defending the Early Years.
Yes, and I think that's a really good question to leave us with, because tomorrow our topic is reimagining advocacy post-COVID-19. The fight to protect childhood continues. So again, if you guys have some concluding thoughts, I'll give you maybe 10, 30 seconds if you really need to get it in. If not, I think it's a good place to stop too, but I'll let you, if anybody really wants to say something.
I just want to say thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. It's so great to meet all of you virtually, and I hope to see you again in the flesh one day.
Yes, I know. You're all the way in California, and I've seen you a lot virtually. I'm going to see you on Saturday. I'm going to see Takima on Saturday.
Yes.
Send the link to that, those events. We're doing a talk for, actually, Cindy Lagan's going to be on tomorrow's panel, and she's the president of the Tennessee, I'm going to mess it all up, but it's an early childhood group in Tennessee, and we're doing a Saturday all day. A is for anti-racism, and we're talking about this in more detail, and we'll have a little bit more time, right, than we had today. And I was able to bring Takima and Ijuma to that, and Keisha, who you will meet tomorrow. So that's going to be stellar. So we'll make sure you get the link to that in your email that you'll get tonight, the newsletter. But yes, for tomorrow, we have a fabulous panel. I'm actually switching my role slightly. I wanted to be on this panel. I want to talk a little bit more than just as a moderator. So Keisha Reed is going to moderate that panel for me. I will be a guest along with Nancy Bailey, Cindy Lagan, Maureen McGurk, and Peter Roswich, and we're talking about reimagining advocacy and where we go from here. So thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow and to keeping this conversation going. We will copy the links from the chat, and we will include those in the newsletter you get today. So that came up as well. And again, thank you, Ijuma, Takima, Diane, thank you. Diane,
thank you.
Susan and Erica, thank you so much. I also want to thank Catherine and Blakely and Nancy for the behind the scenes work, and also want to thank Jiro and Felicia for handling all the tech and making sure that this went off without a hitch. Until tomorrow, thank you, and remember that we are here to protect childhood.